The story of the Book of Esther takes place in the Persian Empire in the 5th century BCE. The Persian Empire was 127 provinces, very, very vast, and it was ruled by a king named Ahasuerus. He was enormously wealthy, and he wanted to show off his wealth, so he threw a 180-day party for everybody in Persia to come to the capital of Shushan. And after this party, which was enormously successful, he wanted to celebrate that party by having a 7-day party. This party was just for the people who lived in Shushan. He invited noblemen and commoner alike. The women were separated from the men. That was the custom of the time. And the king in his party, he just gets so drunk, he doesn't know the difference between wrong or right anymore. And he gets into this discussion where he wants to bring the queen to show off to everybody how beautiful she was, that she was the most beautiful person in all of Persia. So he calls for his attendants to go get the queen, but she winds up refusing to come. Ahasuerus gets furious. He gathers his advisors and he asks them what he should do. The advisors say, well, if the queen disobeys the king, then all women in all the land are given an open door to disobey their own husbands, so they have to punish Vashti. And they decide that she must be banned, which is usually interpreted as that she must be killed. So a decree goes out, and the decree says that all women in all the land must obey their husbands, and they must speak the language that their husbands speak. They can't speak any other language that their husbands don't understand. They also look for a new queen. They're looking for young virgins to come to the palace where they will spend a year with a man named Haggai who runs the harem, basically, and gives them beauty, all things to do with beauty, makeup and oils and clothing, gowns, jewelry, and everything. And each of them, after a year, gets to go spend one night with the king, and then the king would choose which one he wants to be his queen. Well, at the time, in Shushan itself, the capital, there lived a man named Mordecai who was a Jew, and he was raising his young cousin whose parents had died, so he raised his younger cousin. Her name was Hadassah. Hadassah, being a young virgin, was called upon, and Mordecai, before she goes away to the palace, Mordecai says, you have to be careful because you may not want to let them know you're Jewish. So we're going to change your very Jewish name, Hadassah, and you should tell them that your name is Esther, which of course now is a Jewish name, but at the time it was based on Persian names. So she went by Esther from there on. So she goes through the whole thing with Haggai and has her one night with King Ahasuerus, and he of course chooses her to be his queen. He cuts taxes for everybody, and he gives presents to celebrate Queen Esther being his new queen. And then Mordecai, her cousin, comes daily to the king's gate to check up on her. One day he's there, and he overhears two of the palace guards, plotting to kill the king. So he sends a message to Esther to tell the king that there was these two guards plotting. The king winds up calling them to trial, calling them into the court, and yes, they did plot to kill him. And so Mordecai essentially saves the king's life. Shortly after that, King Ahasuerus promotes one of his noblemen, a man named Haman, to be his grand vizier or his right-hand man. Then the king commands that everybody needs to bow before Haman because Haman is, big and powerful. But Mordecai does not bow before Haman. So everybody's asking him, why doesn't he bow before Haman? Haman wants to know, why is this man not bowing before me? And all the people come and tell him, well, he didn't really give a reason. Mordecai just said, I am a Jew. Haman gets furious, and he decides, I'm not just going to kill Mordecai, I'm going to kill all the Jews. But he wants to be very careful about what date he chooses to kill all the Jews. He wants to use what's called pur, or the plural purim, which are lots, to decide what day he should have all the Jews killed on. So he uses these lots, these purim, to decide that the 13th of Adar, being the 12th month of Babylon in the Babylonian calendar, which is very similar to the Hebrew calendar, based on the lunar months, The 13th of Adar will be the day that he winds up having all the Jews killed. But first, of course, he has to go to Achashverosh and say that he wants to kill these people. But he doesn't use the term Jews. He just goes to King Achashverosh and he says, there are these people who have their own laws and they don't follow your laws. They're very bad people. We should have them killed. So I personally, Haman says, I personally will give you 10,000 talents of silver, whatever a talent is, some sort of coin. 10,000 talents of silver to put into your treasuries to pay for this war that we're going to kill all the Jews. And Achashverosh says, well, of course, if these people are not obeying my laws, and keep your money, I will put in my own money. I'll take care of this war. So he gives Haman his signet ring, his signature ring. It's a little ring that you stamp in wax that shows that this was an order of the king. So the decree to kill the Jews goes out, and Mordecai and the Jews all hear about this decree. Mordecai tears his clothing, which is a sign of mourning, and puts on sackcloth and ashes, sackcloth and ash to show that he's mourning, and he wails at the gate. Eventually, the maidens and the attendants of Esther get word to Esther that Mordecai is sitting at the gate mourning. He's wailing and crying, but they don't know why. She sends them back to find out why. Word is sent back to her with the decree, and it says, Haman is going to have all the Jews killed. And so back and forth these messages go, where Mordecai is telling Esther she needs to go to the king and stop this. But Esther tells him, well, I can't just go to the king because you are not allowed to approach the king. The law is you cannot approach the king unless you've been called upon. But Esther hadn't been called on in 30 days at this moment. So she's really worried that if she goes up to him, she might be killed. He killed his previous wife. He had her banished. The only way to be saved from not having that form of punishment is if the king lowers his scepter to her and says, you are forgiven and you can talk to me. So Mordecai winds up convincing her she's going to have to go. She has to save her people. So Esther says, okay, tell you what, I'm going to fast for 3 days. You tell everybody fast for 3 days. Do the same. She winds up putting on sackcloth and ash, and she actually puts dung on her head in addition to the sackcloth and ash, and she fasts for 3 days. At the end of these 3 days, she cleans up, puts on a royal gown, and she approaches the king. Fortunately, Achashverosh lowers his scepter to Esther, does not punish her with death, and he says to her, what is your wish? Anything, up to half my kingdom I will give to you. So Esther at that point doesn't give her full request. She just simply requests that she has a feast with the king and Haman, just the three of them. So immediately they pull together this feast. Achashverosh, Haman, and Esther get together. They drink wine. And then the king asks Esther again, what is your wish? I will give you anything up to half my kingdom. Esther winds up saying, instead of telling him what's up, she says, I would like a second banquet with just you and just Haman. So Haman winds up leaving this banquet, and he's so happy. He is floating on cloud nine. That's not a right phrase, but he's floating. He's so happy. Then as he's going home, though, he sees Mordecai sitting at the gate, and Mordecai angers him. And of course, it's months away still before he gets to kill Mordecai. So he just goes home, and he's really, really pissed off because Mordecai refuses to respect him. He gets home, and he complains to his wife, Zeresh. Well, Zeresh and friends tell him, look, just hang Mordecai. Hang him now on the gallows. Build them 50 cubits high. You'll recall the word cubits from the Noah's Ark story. 50 cubits high. And so he's resolved, yes, this is a good idea. I'm going to go build these gallows. That same night, King Achashverosh, he can't sleep. So he calls for the chronicles to be read to him, the history of his own reign as a king, just to kind of put him to sleep. And they read to him the stories of himself. They come across the story of when there was the plot to kill the king, that Mordecai had wound up sending word to the king to save his life. And the king says, King Achashverosh asked, did I ever reward Mordecai? And of course, he had not. So he's trying to figure out what to do, and he says, well, go get one of my noblemen, one of my advisors. And Haman happened to be out in the courtyard because he had started to have these gallows built. He calls upon Haman to come in, And he asks Haman, there's a man I wish to honor. What should I do for him? So Haman is thinking, well, he's probably talking about me, or he's definitely talking about me. How does he want to honor me? Well, this is how I would want to be honored. And he tells him, this is what you should do. He says, you should give this person royal robes that you have worn, and put this person that should be honored on a royal horse that you have ridden, and put on one of your crowns. And then have one of your noblemen parade him around and lead him around, have everybody cheer that person on while saying, this is how the king honors people who should be honored. So Ahasuerus says, great, you, Haman, need to go and put Mordecai in my royal robes, on my horse, and in my crown, and parade him around. So, of course, Haman's miserable, Mordecai is miserable. They're led around during this parade. And then Mordecai returns to the king's gate, and Haman returns home humiliated. Zeresh totally loses faith in him. She says, you know what? This Jew is going to best you. So then the second feast comes around where he's supposed to go and join just the king, Haman, the king, and Esther. And as they were drinking, the king once again asks Esther, what is your request? I will give you anything up to half my kingdom. Esther winds up revealing Haman's plot to destroy her people, the Jews. So Ahasuerus is furious, and he exits. He leaves out into the courtyard, and Haman freaks out. He's like, oh no, the king's mad. And so he starts begging the queen for forgiveness. He falls upon her lap, and then Ahasuerus at that moment returns to see that this man is on his queen's lap, and he thinks that Haman's attacking Queen Esther at this time. So mad, Ahasuerus winds up hanging Haman on the gallows that Haman had built for Mordecai to hang. Then, of course, they have to deal with this decree to kill the Jews. And Esther asks Ahasuerus to revoke this decree. But in the land of Persia at the time, once a law is written, you cannot retract it. You cannot revoke it. The only thing that he could do was he gave Mordecai his signet ring, and he told Mordecai, go ahead and write a decree that the Jews must defend themselves, and they must kill and annihilate all of their enemies. So the 13th of Adar rolls around, the Jews do defeat their enemies, and they wind up hanging the 10 sons of Haman. After all is said and done, and the Jews are saved, the king raises taxes. That's how the story ends.